Are there any questions? And while you're getting the courage to ask a question, okay, Preston has one.
My question's about devotion. So I'm just wondering, like, what to do when it feels like the romance is gone. So I
Feel like what?
The romance is gone.
Okay.
It's like I love God very deeply, and I just I used to have so many intimate moments with God throughout the day, and as I've transitioned over the last year, I make sure I don't, I have a simple life, and I carve out time, and so that I have time for God, and I don't feel the same fervor that I used to, and it kind of breaks my heart a little.
Repeat the question.
Okay, so what do you do in a devotional way once you feel the romance is gone, where the spontaneous intimacy that you felt before isn't there so much? Well, love is not an emotion. Devotion is not necessarily an emotion. It's more like a deep yearning of the soul that may not express itself. It expresses itself in different ways. And it expresses itself in different ways at different times in different phases of life. And then it's got a wave-like motion where there are some times when you feel very devotional and other times when you feel not very devotional at all. And so I think my best piece of advice would be just keep your mind turned toward God, whether you feel that devotion or not. And that can take many different forms. It can take the form of a conversation with Master. It can take the form of just affirmations or trying to remind yourself, or just some people have done things like, have pictures of Master around the house. In the autobiography, in the chapter with Master Mahashaya, his guru Ramakrishna told him to stop and meditate every time he came to a body of water. And so even those great souls like that need kind of triggering mechanisms. And so find some triggering mechanisms that fit in your life that keep bringing the mind back directed toward not necessarily devotion if you aren't feeling it, but at least the awareness of and the connection with God. In his poem, God's Boatman, what's the name of the poem? Anyway, the line in the poem of God, 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 line in the poem, my mind will ever keep turning on thee in the battle din of activity. Let my silent war cry be God, God, God. So however you keep the spotlight of your mind, when it begins to wander, keep it turned back toward something on your spiritual path, something that's uplifting. Then the natural rhythms of life will bring you back into feelings of devotion again, of that more feeling of the heart and the devotional nature of the feeling of the heart. But even though it may not be expressing itself, as long as you're sincere, that devotion is still there. It's just turning it.
It's such an important question because it's something everyone goes through. But first, let's start with the rational mind. Ask yourself the question, do I really believe that God loves me less? And you don't, but you're not feeling it, and you're not. But just as in any human relationship, like the love you have for a child, like when they're first a newborn baby, it's a certain kind of love, and on until and it goes deeper, and it isn't the same. And sometimes particularly in adolescence, there's big gaps where you just feel like, well, this relationship is over, but it's not. It's not. And so I think you need to understand that devotion is always evolving. And what you're feeling now, it was interesting that you said it kind of is painful. Maybe that's what God is trying to say, go deeper. What you had before was good, but there's something deeper and more. And it's that very pain within your heart that's God calling you to take it deeper, beyond emotions, beyond feeling, and just to have the ultimate experience of devotion is utter stillness, where you feel the unity. And so just keep whatever pain you're feeling because of the lack, identify that as God's calling you to go deeper, and allow your devotion to mature and change, and it will. I at first, watching Swamiji for decades, it was beautiful to see his relationship with Master, in some ways always changing and in some ways unchanging. But in the beginning, he would talk about him often in stories and teachings, and you could feel his whole being was focused on him, on Master. But then as he matured in his later years, it was like in a way, he didn't talk about him so much, because you just felt that he was always with him on a much deeper level. And one time, Jyotish and I were walking around the lower garden at the Crystal Hermitage. This was a year or two before he passed. And he just stopped and he said, "Oh, that's what he meant." And we didn't know what he was talking about. And he said, "Oh," we said, "Swami, what are you saying?" And he said, "I was remembering the way Master, he said something, and then he looked at another disciple, but he was really talking to me and giving me a piece of advice." And so it was like he was always in that moment of being with Master, but it was very internalized. So don't think you've gotten off the track. Just pray for understanding. Where am I now with my devotion? How can I feel it in this new expression? Because just as the way you love your children now at this stage in your life is different from how you loved them when they were small, because you're a different person. Well, the way you love God now is different than the way you loved him when you were 20, because you're a different person. And don't be concerned about that, but try to understand it and go deeper with it.
What's the best way to help others then when you see them stressed and worried?
Okay, in the midst of all the turmoil in the world, how do you help others who are feeling stressed? Well, there's no single simple answer, because it depends on the individual and it depends on what their stressor is. Some may have anxiety about finances, for instance. And you can't just appeal to the mind and give them a good rational talking to and then expect them not to be fearful anymore. Because what they're experiencing in anxiety is not really on a rational basis. It's on an irrational basis and a feeling basis. So in working with someone like that, you have to try to figure out what the link is between what they're feeling and what would cure what they're feeling. So if they're feeling a kind of an anxiety that's generalized, that might be quite different from an anxiety that is pinpointed toward one circumstance. So if it's pinpointed toward a circumstance, you can talk to them or help them see that this is just a passing phase, and in another month or two things will change. But if it's a general anxiety with the world, then that approach might not work. But the key for anything is to think for yourself, what is the polar opposite of the positive? Because any negative emotion is downward flowing energy in a particular way. How do we get the upward flowing energy that addresses that particular kind of issue in their heart? And it'll be different for each person, but it's your job to, if you're going to try to help, to try to figure out what it is that is going to turn things. And then, so that's kind of generalized, but then it depends a lot on the person. Jaya, who's quite wise, said he, in counseling people, he finally decided that when they came to talk with him, he would ask them, are you coming for support or are you coming for advice? And because most people weren't coming for advice, they were pretending to come for advice, but they had already made up their mind about what they were going to do, and what they were coming was to have support. And so I don't know whether he really did that or not. It's a pretty bold question to enter into a counseling session with somebody. But in your own mind, you can do that. Is this person really asking for advice? If so, I'll try to answer. And one of the keys for that is they will sit and they'll spend 10 minutes telling you why they're right before they ask a question, what should I do? And so if they're going to spend 10 minutes telling you why they're right about their mindset, they aren't asking for advice. They're asking for support. And so you have to see each individual that you try to work with, how to work with them. And for those who are asking for support or for comfort, then you give support and comfort. And honestly, only rarely do people really ask for advice. But it's really more of an art. And so you have to work generally, but the key to it always is that you need to be a kind of a voice for their own higher self. And if you can figure out what they're trying to reach toward, what their own deeper self is trying to reach for, and then verbalize for them, but not at length, just kind of a brief verbalization, and then let them almost repeat back to you what you've said so that they affirm it in themselves. But these are just a few suggestions.
A couple of things come to mind as well. We've all heard the story of people would go to Master or to Swami with a list of questions, and then they would come into their presence and they wouldn't ask any, those things seemed kind of trivial, and they'd leave and then they'd say, oh, I didn't ask them any of my questions, because their consciousness was uplifted above the level that the anxiety and worries dwelt on. Well, for most of us, we're not capable of doing that, lifting somebody's consciousness, but we can do it to some extent. Just, if someone is, saying, oh, the world's going to end tomorrow, and, you just try to counter it with, yeah, but there's so much good in the world, and there's so many good people, and there's, just don't let them kind of hardwire into their brain that everything's negative. But then another thing that Swami would typically do instead of giving them advice, he would give them something to do. So if somebody is, gosh, things are so bad, you can listen to them patiently and say, we're having a work day at the church on Sunday or at the community on the grounds. We really need some help, and you're so good with gardens. Maybe you could come over, because they would get the energy flowing. So that's another really good thing to do. Give people something positive to do, like, there's the school system is so terrible and what's going on. Say, I'm going to go over and work with some preschool kids in in an inner city area that are underprivileged. Maybe you'd want to come and help me. And so get the energy flowing in a positive way. And there's a great deal of wisdom in that, because consciousness is always a reflection of the level of energy. And anxiety, I don't know about you, but I feel it in myself. When my energy drops, my worries come back. When my energy is high, my worries just aren't there. So, or mostly. And to a much lesser degree, we saw a wonderful video, a little YouTube video that someone sent us. It's gone viral, and maybe you've seen it. It's a little Indian boy, and it's actually the talk of a motivational speaker. But he must have memorized it, and he's doing it. And he said, whatever, he's just precious. He's, 6 years old. Whatever you do, you get very good at it. And if you worry all the time, you will become very good at worrying. He said, you will be worrying about everything. You will be worrying about the buffalo that you don't even have. and so Jyotish and I, we were kind of teasing each other, because we said, we were saying we spend so much time worrying about this and that and the other, and then we often say, and we worry about the buffalo we don't even have. But anyway, it's a very charming, delightful video if you can find it. Anyway, just meditation in action. When depression is often the outcome of energy that isn't moving. If you can get the energy moving one way or another. It doesn't have to be direct. Maybe you say, hey, I'm going to go paint a wall. Just doing something helps uplift them. And when they're uplifted, the tension and worries go away.
I'll add just one more point here, because sometimes it isn't an individual that you're working with, but a group that you're working with. And Swami was very clear with us, don't work with negative people. And don't argue with the negativity in an individual. But in a group, don't spend your time trying to neutralize those people who gripe all the time or often gripe or complain. Just let them go and work with those who are in tune. And what Swami said, it's the law of magnetism. If you increase the magnetism and energy of those who are in tune with something, then the magnetism of the group lifts, and it'll draw at least the ones who are only a little bit quizzical. It'll draw them into the wake. But if you spend your time working with negative people, you might neutralize them for a day, but they'll revert back quickly to their long-term habit pattern of complaining, because it stems from the thought that if I fix something outside of me, I fix myself. And it doesn't work. And so anyway, in group activities, work with positive energy. And you can think of that same as applying to an individual. Work with their positive energy, not their negative aspect.
Wait, one more thing I want to say.
Okay.
That actually,
we're playing ping pong.
We're playing ping pong, but it's a very important question, really, for today's world. Also, one of the challenges we see in the world today is this divisiveness, religion against religion, race, culture, anything, any way that you're different, there's a wall going up. And so try to help people see a unitive point of view. I read a really beautiful story recently from the German psychologist, the woman who started the hospice movement, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And she was, I believe she was Austrian, and she was trained as a psychologist. So after World War II ended, she worked with a lot of the people who had been in the concentration camps to help them recover. And she said she met one young woman there who most of the people were just so damaged on every level, physically, emotionally, mentally. But there was one woman, a young woman, and she was very radiant and whole. And Elizabeth Kubler-Ross said, well, have you been in the camp? And she said, yes. And did you suffer? Oh, yes. I lost my entire family, mother, father, brothers, sisters. They were all killed. Well, how is it that you don't look so damaged? She said, the desire rose in me to hate the people who had done this. And then I went inside and I realized what those people did, I have the same capacity in myself to do that too. I haven't chosen to do it, but I have it within me to do that. And I felt it made me not feel victim, hatred, blaming, but I just thought this is humanity, and we can choose how we use that. And that was just, I found such an amazing understanding in that situation. But for all of us to, rather than, oh, he's so horrible, and how could he do that, and this politician and that, and up and down, and this news service and that news service, it will go crazy. The divisiveness. It's like Maya is just having, what's Maya? That which divides. And Maya is having a heyday right now. And so just to try to balance that with a unitive, we're all together. I could make the same mistakes that he's making if I was in that position, and not to say he's terrible and I'm good. It doesn't help anything. So anyway, just to try to get a unitive perspective. And Jan.
Okay, there's something that I want to share. And it has to do with this morning when both of you spoke. One said there's light in the darkness. The other one, you said that there is the antidote plant to the toxic plant. Okay. So right now in the world today, when we're talking about this all looks dark, this all looks heavy, this looks like it's not going right, and we're kind of plugged into that a little bit. Well, there's something else going on. Mars, energy and activity, has hit Saturn now, up in the sky, not hit it, but aspected it. And so that is like force, gun, action, and it's like Darth Vader, brick wall. 700 marches are going on in the world today. 2 hours ago, they said that it was packed like sardines on Pennsylvania Avenue. Person after person, I had to turn it off on the radio because it was getting too emotional. But that's the light. So there was shootings over here, shootings over there. They went to a better place, most of them. But the effect was 700 marches. I've got chills all over my legs when you listen to these kids. That's the light.
That's
I
right.
heard one say, I forgive our previous generation. We're going to fix what you will say next.
Right.
And so anyway, but we see that change coming.
That's right.
Every time I just cringe with some of the stuff that Trump does, and I watch his aspects because I can see how he's feeling, I realize that we've been asleep for a long time, and that people are going, oh, I do have moral values. Oh, I do love my neighbor. Oh, I don't agree with this. So I think that there's light that's coming, and it takes a force in order to create a result.
Exactly.
And so I'm just saying, if today there's 700 people marching.
700 marches. You said 700 people, 700 marches.
And they're outside the United States as well, supporting people in the United States. So I thought, that's cool. That's
Thank
when
you.
Go home, you turn on the news, that's what you're going to get to see.
No, that's exactly right. It's exactly right. Swami has a line I guess it's in the Peace Treaty, where he says, in Jewel in the Lotus, darkness lends attractiveness to light.
Right.
And that's just what's going on.
Right.
Yes.
I'm a little bit confused because being with Ananda and seeing how beautifully our master masters try to, bring us to unity with God through yoga, I would think that one of the good solutions to any problems in the world would be just to become yogi and not get really, to the left, to the right, to the left, to the right. And I'm doing this with my wife for some years. We just disconnected TVs. We have 5 of them at home, and we just don't watch them. I stopped listening to the regular radio too. And in my case, it helps me a lot, because when I was listening to the radio, constantly driving my truck, I was really down, and someone came and said, "Hey, did you hear this or that?" I was obviously with that person going down together, Now, when someone asks me a question, I could say, "Don't worry, everything is under control." Because I know nothing about it. So, and also I had a dream once about one of the non-politicians. You know how politicians are. They promise one thing, and the moment they get to the post, they never do it. So I was in the room with one of the presidents, and I'm asking him a question in the dream, why did you say this and you didn't do that at all? And I didn't have an answer. But at the same point, 3 of angels came, and they told me, "Adam, don't worry, everything is under control." So why to worry so much, guys? Just try to be yogi. That's what I've been thinking. Would you explain to us?
I completely agree. To go to a kind of a brain physiological level, when you listen to something negative or fearful, it's like it stimulates the neurons in the brain. And then you get addicted to that stimulation. It doesn't matter whether it's this side or that side. Both sides are trying to stimulate your brain in order to get you aroused, and then they give you a false promise of a solution. And the angels just are sitting over there on the side waiting for all this madness to calm down. So, but it's hard to pull away from addiction. There are clinics for that. We ought to have some news addiction clinics that you could check into, and they would smash your cell phone and unplug your 5 TV sets, or at least put them in a room, one on Fox News, the other on CNN, and let them argue with each other, and you don't have to be involved at all. So I had the idea that we should have one person who's addicted designated as the news source for Ananda. And once a week they would send out an email saying, "This is what you really need to know. There is nothing going on or whatever it is." But instead of everybody having to get the news every 5 minutes, maybe just once in a while, so that you don't feel like you're being irresponsible for not tuning in every 5 minutes. That's the other part of addiction, is this kind of addiction, is that it comes with the sense that if you don't follow the news really carefully, the world is going to get out of control because you aren't paying attention.
But we read an article recently called "The Radicalization of America," and it was a columnist, I believe it was like in New York Times or Washington Post or something like this, but it was just not a news column, but an opinion column. And this woman said, I had, on my news items, I clicked, seeing a certain line of thinking, mainly liberal thinking. And then she said, I started getting these news items coming up which were far left. And then she said, I did the opposite thing. I clicked on conservative news items, and then I started getting these news feeds that were far right. And she said, I realized that it's really a conscious effort on the part of the, at least internet news, the electronic news media, that they want to keep you kind of on edge. So whatever your natural thinking is, they'll take it to the next level. And it's a real thing that happens. And so that's, again, one of the dangers of looking at the news is that whatever your kind of general leading is, they're trying to push you to an extremist position, right or left in that. So it's, you're trapped. We're kind of like helpless victims of this kind of media war that's going on. And, anyway, I think everyone has to make their own individual decision. I don't think we can say don't look at the news at all. But I think certainly watch the amount that you're doing, get the main drift of what's going on, and don't so much of what comes up on the internet, which is mainly how we get our news. I always ask myself the question, is this news or is it gossip? And most of it's gossip. He said this to her, and he called him, and he didn't call him, and they said this in the back room, and it's just like, who really knows any of it? So if it's hard news, there's a big storm on the East Coast. Well, I have friends on the East Coast. I'd like to know about that. But if it's just gossip, then what does that help you?
It's at least helpful to know that most of what's coming in is toxic. And decide how much of it you want to drink.
Our spiritual path, when we really talk about yoga, I think a lot of people in America don't understand. They think it's hatha, the postures. And I just had the pleasure of being in India for the past month. And we were visited by the Vice President of India, the Prime Minister, and the Director of Tourism, and then a Puja Swamiji, and it was a few hours of them presenting. And some people didn't want to go. There were 2,000 people from 97 countries there together in Rishikesh. And I really wanted to hear what they had to say. And a lot of people said, it's just politicians. It was the most amazing deliveries of yoga and yoga saving the world. And they have in their administration the focused attention on yoga, the direct teachings. You probably know this, but for me it was so breathtakingly beautiful to experience that and to walk away with that. And I just feel we have the opportunity to spread Master's work in such deep ways. And I thank you, and I thank Ananda and all that we're doing. So I look forward to us hearing that news.
Yeah, India is a very fertile ground. Devi and I are going to India on next Saturday, and we're going to be there for 2 weeks in order to work consulting, because there's a man who is very, very wealthy who wants to do an institute of, we would call it dharmic leadership. He sees that one of the problems in India and in the world